Well, this morning I would like to look at a parable or a story that Jesus told about a rich man. A man with a lot of money, but a man with not a lot of brains. Now, I'm not just picking on him because the rich are an easy target, because the rich can be an easy target sometimes. I mean, look at Jeff Bezos, for example. He's got all the money in the world, and what does he spend it on? A rocket to nowhere. I mean, the rich can be an easy target, but that's not the reason. It's because actually the mistake this guy makes in this story is a one we're all prone to making. And the lesson that Jesus is telling us is very relevant to us all. I'm going to read from Luke 12, verses 13 to 21. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods, laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you've prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God.'" A rich man who had very little sense. Now, this is a story about money, yes. And it's about how we view money. But you know, it's not just about money. You can apply this exact same mistake to many areas of life. There are many areas and ways we need to learn what it is to be rich toward God. We can be old. We can be young. We can be everything in between. And this parable is relevant to you. Because it tackles a very big question for all of us. What really matters in life? And I guess that's the big question we all have about life. What really matters? Now, for this guy, it was obvious. It was his finances. It was his comfort. But it wasn't just that. It was himself. And Jesus calls him a fool. You get that for a moment. The Messiah calls you a fool. If Jesus calls somebody a fool, you've got to believe they are a fool. But he doesn't just call them a fool. He says, God says you were a fool. So that's a pretty big condemnation, isn't it? And Jesus is warning us that the things of this world can very much become a distraction from what really matters in life. Now, before we get into it, I want to wheel back to the very start of the story, because Jesus tells this story as a response to somebody. Someone asks Jesus to get involved in their inheritance dispute. Like somehow that's a good use of Jesus' time. He seems a little bit presumptuous, doesn't he? Say, "Jesus, can you sort out this problem I'm having with my brother?" You know, I mean, like, really? He's preaching at the moment. Have you not got something better? But actually, taking your unsettled disputes to rabbis was a common thing at the time. If there was a respected rabbi, they would arbitrate over this kind of thing. So the guy asking the question isn't that unusual. But what Jesus does is saying, you're not drawing me into that, because I can see exactly what's wrong in your life. I can see where your priorities lie. Let's talk about that instead. He uses it as an opportunity to challenge people on what matters most to you. And he tells us a story about a rich, self-centered man who missed the whole point of his life. Now, there's two things that initially jump out about this guy to me. Number one, this guy does not see outside of himself. You know, there's no parable with the word I, me, and mine in it more than this one. And sadly, I think that's a reflection on the world today as well. We live in a world of I, me, and mine. We're like we all sound like opera singers warming up. We're all me, 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 me. Sorry, that was better in there. We live in a me and my society. You see, social media might have increased our sense of global justice and concerns, but I tell you, it's made the me part of us more prominent, so much more important. Listen, we are not much different from this guy often, because we all make ourselves the hero of our own story. But a life lived for us misses the point of life. This guy's almost aggressive in his self-centeredness. I mean, he says, I've got so much stuff, I've got nowhere to keep it. Never once does he think, well, maybe I could help somebody with this. He just goes, guess I'm going to need a bigger storage space. Do you know in America, there's this epidemic of people having storage spaces because they don't have enough space in their house to store all their stuff. You know, and it's becoming a thing here. We have storage units because we just have so much stuff. We never think of thinking, if I need to rent an extra space to keep it, maybe I've got too much stuff. Anyway, he has this huge amount of goods. It never occurs to him to go, well, if I've got too much, maybe I could be useful to other people. His whole attitude is actually the reverse of what Christianity should be. Instead of denying himself, he affirms himself. Instead of finding happiness in giving, he tries to find happiness in keeping. You know, John Wesley, the great Methodist preacher, had a wonderful rule for life. His rule was this: save all I can and give all I can. So how it worked for him was like this. When he was at Oxford, his income was £30 a year. Now, I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but, you know, it was a long time ago. It wasn't that bad. So he worked out what he needed. He said, okay, it's going to cost me £28 to live on. That's how much I'm going to need for the year. And he gave £2 away. Now, that initially doesn't seem like very much, does it? But he worked out what he needed and said, I'm going to give the £2 away. But get this, when his income increased to £60, he still lived on 28 because his costs hadn't gone up. Now he gave away £32. Then his wage became 90, £120 a year. Guess what? He still lived on the 28, and he gave the rest away. He knew what he needed, and the rest he knew would be a blessing to other people. I tell you, and I'm not suggesting we all do this, because of course we are living in a time of huge inflation at the moment, but what a principle that is. What a principle. He made sure he could maximize his generosity. I wonder how often we think like that. We have a tendency, you see, to increase our disposable spending whenever our finances are doing well. But John Wesley's way of thinking there, I tell you, that's rich towards God. That's thinking of others. He gets more money, he doesn't think, oh, what else can I buy? He thinks, oh, that's more to give. I tell you, I find that absolutely inspiring. Inspirational. That challenges me. Because the reality for us is very often our budget will expand to fill whatever wage we have, if we let it. But maybe, just maybe, our budgets don't need to. See, built into the world we live in today is the idea you must always have more. You know, as a nation, if we buy less this year than we did last year, we call it a recession, and people start losing their jobs. How bizarre. Our entire economy is propped upon the idea that you, Ian, have to spend more this year than you did last year. And if you don't, you're causing problems for this nation. Isn't that crazy? And if you don't have it, that's okay. We have credit. We have credit. But don't get too much, otherwise the whole thing collapses a different way. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But capitalism depends on the idea that you always should have more than you had last year. Here's the problem, though, with more. And we have it fed into us through advertising, through all kinds of different ways. But more, if you feed it, is never satisfied. More always wants more. The Romans had a proverb about money that I think applies to all things in general. They said money was like seawater. The more a man drank, the thirstier he became. Now, just as we're looking at this guy, it does make us pause for a moment and think and ask a question. Is it wrong to think about the future? Is that what Jesus is getting at here? Well, no. What's wrong, what this guy was doing, was thinking about the future while forgetting about God. He was thinking about future in terms of himself and nothing else. He was thinking about himself and his future, but he was never thinking about the one who holds the future. What's wrong is thinking about the future only in terms of yourself, only in terms of your needs, only in terms of your wants. It's all a matter of perspective. See, there would have been nothing wrong if he thought, you know what, if I build a bigger barn, then I can use those resources to help people. Or a bigger barn, I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll start employing people and give some people a wage. He didn't do any of that. He just went, I'll be able to sit back, relax, and eat and drink and be merry. That's all he thought about. We can sum up his goal with that phrase, actually. I will say to my soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Never did he think about others. See, this isn't just about money. For him, the money was a means to an end, to that. That was the means for his goal in life. So you can't just confine this to being about money. It's about what matters to you. You can replace money with a great many things and still get the same end result and still be not rich towards God. Second thing he does is he never sees beyond this world. Every single one of his plans were based on this life, this world. He gave no thought to what's outside of it. And that's a huge mistake, isn't it? Because this life ultimately is a moment. in the light of eternity. There's an old conversation, a story of a conversation between a young ambitious man and an older wise man. The young man comes up to him and says, I'm going to learn a good, excuse me, I'm going to learn a good trade. And the old man comes up to him and says, and then? I'm going to start up a business. And then? I'll make my fortune. And then? I'll have a family. And then? I suppose I'll retire and live off what I've made. I'll look after the grandkids. And then? I suppose I'll die. And then? See, the man who gives no thought for the next world will one day have quite the shock. Look, we should work. Of course we should work. We should earn. We should do well. But we must never forget, if eternity is an ocean, our life here is nothing more than a drop of water. Anything we have in this life that we think is worth trading for eternity, that's a bad deal. It's a bad deal. You know, sometimes people are, I don't want to become a Christian because I enjoy this too much. And you think, really? It's worth that much? That much? I tell you, we trade eternity in for some rubbish. Rubbish. You don't have to have a focus on money to be like this guy. I just want to speak to somebody who's watching. That's been your reason so long. I'm not ready. I'm enjoying this too much. I'm not ready. I don't want to call you a fool, but I'm gonna. It's a bad deal. It's a bad deal. When it really comes down to it, what is the thing your life is really about? Anyone seen the film City Slickers? Yeah, anyone not? Well, oh dear me. Let me explain. Billy Crystal is a guy who's about to turn 40. I watched this film a lot in my run up to 40. And he's really down on his life. In fact, he goes to his kids, bring your dad to work and explain about his career day, and gives the most depressing speech about getting old you can ever imagine. He's down. He's getting old. His career isn't where he wanted it to be. He's unhappy with everything he's doing. So as a birthday present, he's been given a holiday to go on a cattle drive across the west of America. And he meets this grizzled old cowboy called Curly. And this guy has it together. This guy has a focus in life that he admires. He knows what his life is all about. So Billy Crystal asks him, he says, what is the meaning of life? And Curly says, one thing. One thing. And during the course of the film, Billy has to learn what that one thing is for him. And spoiler, in case you haven't seen it, it turns out it's his family. But, and I think this gets to one of the problems we have to it. That's kind of true, but it's also not true. There is just one thing that life is about. But it's not different for each one of us. It's not something you have to find. That one thing is actually the same for every single person who's ever lived. And it's this one thing. Where do you stand with God? That's it. In the midst of business, of work and family and church and school and social time, if you get any, We can't keep our attention everywhere all at once. It's just not possible. I wonder this morning, what is your one thing? What is the one thing you're living for? Because I know there should be only one answer. But in our lives, we tend to live like there's lots of different answers. Jesus calls this man a fool because he looked ahead at his life, and it turns out there was no ahead left. He didn't get to do any of this stuff he imagined, build bigger barns, eat, drink, and be merry. He didn't get to do any of that because his life was shorter than he could have imagined. He neglected what really mattered. Now, this is Good News Sunday. But let's start with some bad news. This week, Pastor Cliff's had COVID. So I've covered for him in 3 funerals this week. I haven't done a funeral in years. And one thing that really struck me, you hear the eulogy of somebody's life, and everybody's life's different. But everybody ends up at that place. The last one really got to me. It was a guy who'd beaten cancer, beaten a tumour, retired, and then fell down the stairs. None of us know when our soul will be required of us. None of us. And the bad news is, if God is not on our agenda, on the night our soul is required of us, there is nothing we can do to change the outcome. We've all wandered. We've all been selfish. We've all been like this man. You know, I know a lot of us in the room this morning, we've got stuff going on, haven't we? We've got problems. We're having a hard time sometimes. What we can't do is neglect that question of where do we stand with God? Because we do not know. This day comes to us all, and it is the only question that matters. Listen, when you stand before God, what won't matter is how much did you earn? How big was your house? How many items did you manage to knock off your bucket list? It won't be how much did you enjoy life. It won't be how big was your family. It won't be how good a person were you. It's amazing how many think that's the one, but it's not. It is, where do you stand with God? And that's where the good news comes in. We've all failed. We've all distanced ourselves from God. We have all been selfish throughout our entire lives. But God had a plan to fix it. Jesus came for us. Jesus did the very opposite of this man in this parable. This man only thought about what himself and what he could gain. But Jesus had everything that you could ever have. He was King of heaven. It doesn't get bigger than that. He had the glory of heaven. Angels worshipped him and adored him. And he set it aside. There's a song we sing, you laid aside your majesty. Gave up everything for me. He left it because he thought of us. He thought of you. He thought of a lost and broken humanity. And he set aside all that glory and was born in a manger. He lived a perfect life in the sense that he did no wrong. But it was not a perfect life in the sense that he had no wrong done against him. He lived a life of suffering, of sorrow. And then ultimately he died. Why? For us. Jesus uses this parable as an example to pose a question. And if we were honest about this question, this guy in the story doesn't seem too dissimilar to us, really. We often trade thinking about God and thinking about eternity for what we want here and now. We make the selfish decisions, the selfish choices, the selfish plans. And none of us know the day that our soul will be required and we will meet our Creator face to face. And we all have the same problem. If we were honest, we know on that day we'd be found wanting. But thank God that Jesus is the solution to the problem we could never fix. Jesus paid the price for us. Jesus paid the price for you. Jesus paid the price. And because of him, we can stand before God on that day when our soul is required of us. And we can stand before God, get this, as if we never sinned. Not in our righteousness, we stand in his. And we can be acceptable to God. Not because of anything that we've done, but because of what he did. But we must go through Jesus. John 14:6, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. The good news this morning is he did this for everyone. Bring that down to the good news for you is you are part of everyone. This offer is open to anyone. But we must know he is the only way for anyone. Let's not be like that rich fool who gave no thought of the things to come. Let's not be like that man who put things in front of his connection with God. But let's be wise. And let's come to Jesus. What really matters in life? One thing. Where do you stand with God? I'd like to give an opportunity. Listen, I know all you guys in the room, but I don't know all the guys watching. If you've never made that decision, if you've spent your life trading the eternal for the temporary, that can change. And that can change now. What it requires is that you come to him. You believe in him. You accept what he's done for you. And if there's anyone watching who wants to do that, I'm going to pray. Ask everyone in this room to pray along with me. Is that okay? There's nothing in the prayer itself. It's not magic words. But what it means is you want to make a decision to follow Jesus. Let's pray together. Jesus, I thank you for dying for me. I'm sorry for my sin. I'm sorry for going my own way. But I believe that you can bring me back to God. I believe you died and rose again. And from today I want to live for you. Come into my life, Jesus. And be my Lord and my Savior. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, maybe for the first time, our email address is on the screen. If you happen to be in the room and prayed it for the first time, you don't need to email, you can just come speak to someone. Now I'd like to pray for the rest of us. You've made that decision, you're a follower. You know you're saved. But you've let some other stuff get in the way. You've allowed your focus to become shifted. You've not stopped following. But maybe God seems a little distant now because there's a few other things in the way. This morning you can put those down. You can make that decision that they're not going to follow you around anymore. You're not going to trade anything temporary for what you have in God. I'm going to ask you to do something brave. I'm going to ask you to stand where you are. So I'd like to pray for you. I know standing's hard. But it requires you to do something about it now. Lord, I pray for all those who are standing. I don't know the circumstance. I don't know the thing that's in the way. But their standing this morning is a declaration that they don't want to trade the temporary for the eternal anymore. And Lord, I just pray, Lord, that thing that they're standing for will no longer be their focus. That, Lord, they'll have put it down. And Lord, they'll be able to move on from today. Lord, with nothing blocking their walk with you. Pray, Lord, to give them strength. And they've made a statement by standing. And Lord, I just pray, give them the strength to follow up on that statement. Amen.